Hi everyone, welcome back. Long time no see. In fact, so long time no see that it is well and truly the festive season. And if you're like me, it may not yet be December, but you're still probably well underway with your holiday gift buying. I'm about halfway through, I'd say. I've still got a few things to get and a few people to buy for, and I'm looking for inspiration for, but I like to start early because it gives me time in terms of ordering online and also just like seeing what sparks joy when I see it. So yeah, I'm here with what you can obviously tell is my annual holiday gift guide. I thought no better video to come back with really, and I've been getting a few messages from people on different platforms because usually I would have uploaded my holiday gift guide before now. I usually upload it mid-November, but life. So I am here, I'm finally here. Here's the gift guide. I hope it is still helpful to those of you who haven't bought all of your holiday gifts, or will potentially be helpful to you in the future when buying gifts for other people. In this video I will be covering bookish gifts, or specifically books, for all age ranges from, you know, like someone in their hundreds to younger children. So I will start with the adult books and then work my way through the young adult books to the children's books, and that way you can stick around for whatever part is most relevant to you, and just pick up what you'd like to pick up. So I've got a few different things in terms of non-fiction that will hopefully appeal to a few different people, but you know, by virtue of it simply being me, there are certainly some themes and trends in there. Starting with probably like the smallest books, the best books on a tight budget, the ones that might fit in a stocking if that's what you're looking for. I want to mention some more of the 404 Inklings. So I've mentioned these in the past. Maybe I even mentioned them in my last year's Christmas gift guide, but they're still coming out. They're coming out regularly. In fact, I have one coming out in January. Insert picture somewhere here. And there have been some excellent releases this year in 2023, and as you know, I like to focus on more recent titles for these gift guides so that I'm telling you about things that people are less likely to already have. And two in particular I wanted to mention here because I think they'll appeal potentially to the same people, potentially to different people, and they'll be really interesting gifts. So if you don't know, the 404 Inkling series are basically just like really niche little non-fiction examinations of really niche little non-fiction topics, and they could be on anything. And the two I have here are Machine Readable Me, The Hidden Ways Tech Shapes Our Identity by Zara Rahman. So this is obviously a little book about technology, about the way that technology is very much part of all of our lives every day, but even more than that, the way it impacts others' perceptions of ourselves, our perceptions of other people, and the world around us, and goes towards shaping our identities and how much control and lack of control we maybe have on that. So I think this is one that will definitely interest a few different people. This is actually my partner's because he is super into tech, so I thought that would be worth bringing up. And then the next one I thought would be worth mentioning was BFFs, The Radical Potential of Female Friendship by Anahit Baruz. And this one would obviously make a great present for one of your best friends. Like if you've got a best girlfriend, if you've got a female friendship that means a lot to you, this has got to be the perfect gift, right? And I love that it's a book that looks at the positivity of relationships between women in particular, because particularly when I was growing up, women's relationships with one another, female friendships, were depicted as very toxic, and that's not really my experience. So yeah, these are two little gifts I think would make perfect gifts, as would pretty much any book from this series, which you can check out the entire catalogue of. I will link it down below. But if you're looking for something a little chunkier, a little bit meatier, then I do have some suggestions for you. Now, I know a lot of people have history buffs in their life, even if it's not just them. I know a lot of people that are into different aspects and areas of history and just like learning about something new. So I thought I would mention a couple history books. One of them is Tutankhamun's Trumpet, The Story of Ancient Egypt in 100 Objects by Toby Wilkinson. Now this isn't a book specifically and only about Tutankhamun, one of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs. It's about ancient Egyptian history as a whole, but looking at it through a number of objects. So it's like a nice little jumping in point. You don't really need to have a little background on antiquity or ancient Egypt to read this. You can just learn little bits about the culture, a little bit about the history, a little bit about the different dynasties through these objects. And I think it's a really fun, accessible way to get in to history, but it's also great for people who are already really into historical period, because they might learn about an object they didn't know about before. Like if you gave me a book that was 100 objects from ancient Greece. Even though I have a PhD in ancient Greece, I'm sure there would be objects in there that I either had forgotten about or didn't know about, and it would be really interesting to learn about. But then for those who maybe want something a little more modern, but not too modern, don't get me wrong, not too modern, we have a book on medieval history. And this is The Once and Future Sex Going Medieval on Women's Role in Society by Eleanor Janega. And this is a book on women's lives, women's roles in society, attitudes to women, etc, etc, in the medieval world, particularly I would say with a leaning on medieval Europe, and it's something that's super duper interesting. It's also a very accessible book. I have read this one from cover to cover and I didn't feel as though I needed to have any prior knowledge to read it. It felt like I could jump straight in, and I think that will be true for a lot of readers. So if you've got someone that's interested in history, in the medieval era, in history of Europe, who's interested in the history of women, for example, and also maybe how history of women is particularly relevant still today to modern day women, because that's something it touches on as well, and I think this would be an excellent gift. I also think it's a really nice cover and a really nicely designed book. Carrying on with the medieval theme though, I also want to suggest this book, which is particularly beautiful. It has gold foiling, which elevates any book, any gift really, doesn't it? And it's The Deer Hoard by Hannah Vidine, which is an Old English bestiary. So this combines history with a little bit of folklore and with the natural world. So any interest in any three of those things, I think will make this a perfect gift. It basically looks at animals in the medieval world, attitudes to animals, thoughts and ideas around animals, the reality of animals and different species, etymology of different animal names, as well as animals and the animalistic in folklore. So we've got a lot of different things being touched on there to look at broadly animals in the medieval world, as it says, an Old English bestiary. Now I do have a few more books here that I guess you could argue touch on fiction and non-fiction, but for exclusively non-fiction I do have one more title, and it's actually an art book. But this is the kind of art book I think will appeal to art fans, which is a very overarching wide category, and fantasy readers, because it is The Art of Fantasy by S. Elizabeth. This is an art book. It is a beautiful coffee table book looking at the depiction of fantastical scenes and fantastical worlds and fantastical creatures and characters in art. Now I am assuming that you are seeing an overlay as I'm speaking of some of the images inside this book and what you can expect inside, because it is a very visual book, but you'll also learn a little bit about the artists, about the subjects that they're painting, about ideas around fantasy that correspond to the time that these artists are working in, and I think it's a really beautiful book. I am not an artist in terms of drawing or painting or any of that kind of art. I am a writer, but I love this book for how visually interesting it is and how inspiring it is as a fantasy writer and fantasy reader, but I think it will also appeal to people with a more artistic side. So you know, you've got a bit of history, you've got a bit of art, you've got a bit of fantasy, and I think for that reason it will appeal to a lot of different people, and it's a book that I highly recommend to any fantasy authors in particular. But if you'd prefer to give the person in your life a little fiction, I do have some of that too, including short stories and novels. So the first one is a natural candidate for this video because it is the newest Terry Pratchett book. Now of course Terry Pratchett has passed away, but this is a collection of his stories compiled in one place for the first time. So they've all been brought together in one place, and it is titled A Stroke of the Pen, The Lost Stories, with a foreword by Neil Gaiman. So realistically, if there's anybody in your life who's a Terry Pratchett fan and hasn't got around to picking this up yet because it's quite a recent release, this is going to be the perfect gift for them. And you'll probably know if someone in your life is a Terry Pratchett fan because they'll never shut up about it, like me. You know, if you love Terry Pratchett, you talk about Terry Pratchett. I have read some of the stories in this collection so far and they're absolutely splendid. This edition in particular is the independent bookshop edition, so there is a black cover and a white cover, the white cover being the independent bookshop edition, and then the black cover, which is equally as beautiful, you can get in other bookshops. So it's worth checking both if you're interested in a specific edition. It's a beautiful book, let's be honest, and the black edition is beautiful too. It's really stunning, and a really special thing I think to gift a Terry Pratchett fan. this year. If the person you're gifting to is a fantasy fan though and would prefer a novel, then I have to say I think one of my top recommendations of 2023 adult fantasy novel releases to gift this Christmas is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. This is a utterly charming fantasy novel set in the late 1800s, I think it is. It's a sort of like alternative version of our world. It isn't quite like our world, but is very similar, where we follow a scholar, Emily Wilde, who's a scholar of fairies, not just in terms of like folklore, but real fairies, because there is an understanding and knowledge that fairies do very much exist in the corporeal world. You know, you can meet them, you can talk to them, and you can record information about them. So it's got that academia vibe, maybe light academia, as well as a touch of the fairy tale and the fantasy, and like a very sweet undercurrent of romance. Like, it's not purely a romance, but it has got a little bit of that in there, and it's really, really enjoyable. I adored this book. The hardback is stunning, but it might actually be out in paperback now because it came out in hardback at the very beginning of the year, so it's worth checking for both options depending on what you'd rather buy the person you're gifting to. But yeah, I think this would be perfect for really any like fairy fantasy fans. If they're into that kind of thing and they haven't read this yet, they'll love this. It's wonderful. And of course I couldn't film a holiday gift guide without including some retellings, so I do want to suggest for any Greek mythology nerds, Greek mythology fans in your life, or Roman mythology fans in fact as well, the book Herc by Phoenicia Rogerson. Now this is out in hardback at the minute. This is a proof, which is why it's a big floppy paperback, but the cover is the same. And it is a retelling, naturally, of the story of Heracles. Now, Heracles' whole life, I mean by that, from start to end. And that's not something I've come across much in the retelling world. And I think this is a phenomenal book because it really brings all of these strands of mythology together, all of the different myths he's involved in, all the different people he meets, all the different things he does, including the pretty horrific, as well as the sometimes brave and heroic. And it also doesn't straightwash Heracles, which is something that is done a lot in popular media. So I really, really enjoyed this retelling. I thought it was very witty, very clever, and very engaging. So if you know anybody that's into their Greek and Roman myths, they'll probably like this, because this is a recognisable Heracles for me. But if the person you're buying for would prefer a retelling of something else that's maybe, you know, read enough Greek and Roman myth retellings for the time being and maybe want something a little bit different, I did think I would suggest this, which is Ever Rising Sun by Jamila Ahmed. It is a retelling of 1001 Nights, but from the perspective of Scheherazade. I say but from the perspective, it's not like it's never not from the perspective of Scheherazade, but focusing in on Scheherazade, who is the protagonist of 1001 Nights, the woman narrating the stories throughout 1001 Nights. And this is focusing in on her experience as the storyteller, because if you don't know, Scheherazade is actually in a very dangerous situation. She needs to tell these stories basically to save her life and potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of other women's lives. I love the 1001 Nights, I love Scheherazade, and I love the fact that I'm seeing more retellings of her stories. So if you're looking for, you know, like a beautiful, fantastical retelling hardback book that's both stunning inside and out, there you go. That one will make a great present. Just trust me. But not everybody's a fantasy fan, and that's completely okay. I do have two more recommendations for those that are not, and the first one is one you've probably seen around a lot, and that is Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kwang. So they may have read this already, they may have picked it up. If they haven't, get it for them because they probably want to read it. I feel like this is on everybody's TBR who hasn't read it yet, and for good reason. It's a fantastic novel, and I actually suggested this to a friend of mine who was looking for a present to buy their friend, who's a big reader, and they asked me about like recent releases that they might like and would be a good gift, and I said Yellowface, that's the one to get them if you're looking for something just like really, really readable and really, really interesting. And they did buy it for them, and the person loved it. So evidence, this is a great gift, and I am a great gift suggester. So if you don't know, this is basically an expose of the publishing industry. It's a thriller, shall we say, told from the perspective of a very unreliable narrator, a woman who takes credit for her dead friend's novel. And then if you're looking for just like a straight up thriller that's really well written, you can't go wrong with Elisa Jewell. This is the latest Lisa Joe. She's one of my favourite thriller writers working today. Her books are very popular and like enjoyed by a lot of people. So if you know somebody that likes thrillers, it might be worth giving them a Lisa Joel, and this is the one that maybe they're less likely to have because it's the newest one out. It's called None of This Is True. Her Lies Could Kill You. It's also probably a good one for podcast fans because this book does involve a podcast. Now, it wouldn't be a Jean gift guide if there wasn't some books specifically on folklore and mythology though, would there? So that's what I'm going to talk to you about now. Particularly these are books aimed at adults, and there are some books aimed at younger readers on similar topics coming up. But first and foremost, I do want to suggest you check out Greek Myths, Heroes and Heroines, and Greek Myths, Gods and Goddesses, edited by yours truly. These are part of the Pan Macmillan Collectors Library, which are gorgeous little books that Pan Macmillan publish that are either like classic novels or collections of stories from lots of different authors, or like in this case, a collection of different Greek myths, specifically as told by predominantly Victorian writers, so Victorian authors writing Greek mythology. So it's a little combination of a few different things there depending on what you're interested in, and they focus in on two different subcategories of Greek mythology. Obviously they're overlapping, but it was a way to get as many myths in there as possible by doing a Heroes and Heroines and a Gods and Goddesses one. So I picked all of the myths in here and the versions of the myths in here that I thought were engaging, that honoured the originals, that would make great introductions to these myths for you, that would introduce some characters that you've maybe heard about before but also some that you haven't, and I accompanied those with my own like commentary and introductions to each story and the books as a whole. So I just think in general the Macmillan Collectors Library is a beautiful gift giving series, and as these came out this year it just felt like I had to mention them, you know. Buy them, don't buy them, but I think they'd make great gifts. I do have some folklore and myth though that I didn't write or edit, and that is Scotland the Strange, Weird Tales from Storied Lands, edited by Johnny Mains. This is another one that collects together stories from different writers, and of course specifically in this case we've got Scottish stories brought together, particularly the weird, the creepy, the strange. And this is part of a series published by the British Library, which I absolutely adore. This is the third book in the series I own. There are a few other ones, including one that's all about the Celtic weird and one that's about fearsome fairies, but this is the latest. This one came out in 2023 and I love this series. I think the material that is written to accompany the stories is fantastic. I think it really immerses you in the stories and the genres you're reading and the literary trends you're reading about as you read them, and I also think they're great selections of stories. They're also incredibly beautiful, and if that's not consideration when buying a gift, I don't know when it is when buying a book. So yeah, love these books in general, and because this one is the latest one out, I thought I would mention it. I then have a mythology book that I actually think would very much work for both adults and young adults, so don't take this as an exclusively adult book recommendation. It could very much be a gift for teens as well, and that is Tales of Polynesia, Folk Tales from Hawaii, New Zealand, Tahiti and Samoa. Again, this is bringing together various different stories from various different writers in one space, and accompanying them with absolutely gorgeous original illustrations that were created for this book. So again, I'm probably going to be popping over some images now that you can see and get a closer look into this book for, but it's part of a series published by Chronicle Books, which include, I think, Indian mythology, there's one on Celtic mythology, one on Nordic stories, I think one that's just more generally about monsters and mythology. So again, a gorgeous series with gorgeous books, and this is the latest in that series. And then one that is incredibly specific, like this is only going to appeal to a small subset of people, but I had to mention it in case you know one of those people because they will love this book, and that's Tales from the Green Acorn, the World and Art of Everdell. So Everdell is a board game. It is in fact my favourite board game of all time. It's incredible. It's been going for a few years. There's multiple expansions, and in one of their recent Kickstarters, I mean in the past few years, where they released one of their expansions, they also offered this book. But naturally not everybody would have joined the Kickstarter or bought the book via the Kickstarter, and it is now available to buy more generally, so that anybody can pick up that is a fan of Everdell. And it is a really hefty book that gives a lot of background into the world of Everdell, and there's a lot of like world building that's gone into the game, so it's really nice to have some of that world building collected together, as well as more material for anyone who just thinks it's an interesting world with interesting characters and wants to learn more. There's stories about those characters, there's more details in terms of the gorgeous artwork that's part of the board game, and yeah, if you know somebody that likes Everdell, they'll probably love this book. If you're interested in more board game recommendations though, my partner and I do run a board game Instagram, which we haven't been super active on recently because I haven't been super active anywhere recently, but it's called Just a Couple of Meeples over on Instagram, and we are planning on uploading some board game specific holiday gift guides in the next few weeks, so if those would be of interest, you can check them out on there. But with that said, I want to move into more of the YA specific books. I do think this one would be great for young adults too if they're into Everdell, but the rest are YA specific. So let's start with novels. Now, if there's one genre I feel like has like taken a hold of the YA literary and television world really in the past few years, it feels like it's been the YA thriller. I feel like the popularity of the YA thriller has grown exponentially, whether it be set at summer camp or murders at high school or drama between friends. It's something that has like very much taken a hold, and there are more and more fantastic books coming out that fit into this subcategory. So if you know a teen who enjoys TV shows or books like One of Us is Lying, then these would be perfect recommendations. So the first one is There's No Way I'd Die First by Lisa Springer, and this is a party slasher thriller. It is about our protagonist, a 17-year-old who's obsessed with all things horror, loves horror movies, loves horror books, everything, and she wants to throw the best Halloween party any of her friends have ever experienced. So yeah, she goes ahead and does that. Unfortunately, however, things turn a little darker than they were meant to, or at least the darkness becomes a little more real than it was meant to. This book includes killer clowns and fabulous final girls and is well worth checking out for anybody who enjoys a YA thriller. But of course, if you're into YA thrillers, then you may very well have already read or know somebody who's read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, who is very much becoming queen of this genre, and for good reason. Her books are phenomenal, and she did bring out a new one this year, which is 5 Survive. This in particular is a standalone, so it's really nice if you're not necessarily wanting to commit somebody in your life to a series and just want to get them a standalone novel, and they've maybe read books like Good Girl's Guide to Murder already. Now technically this did come out in 2022, but I really wanted to mention it, so I'm mentioning it. It's about a group of friends who have a breakdown on the road in their car during spring break and end up trapped in the wilderness for 8 hours and have to survive. So fun. Yeah, there we go. I then have something a little bit more fantastical, also a little bit horrific, and a little bit historical. Well, a lot of it historical. And that is The Spirit Bears Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White. This is set in a 19th century London where the veil between the living and the dead has thinned. We have those trying to commune with the dead going all around the city, and then we have our protagonist. Silas, who is a trans boy whose parents refuse to recognise them, is diagnosed with veil sickness and sent off to a finishing school where he discovers he can see ghosts. Now this book both has trans rep as well as autistic rep, which I think is fantastic when buying for a younger reader or yourself, because it's so important to see those representations, see yourself represented in your books, and it can be really affirming. So I think that's also worth bearing in mind when buying for somebody. Can you give them something life affirming, something positive in the book that you're gifting them? And this also has a gorgeous cover. Yeah. Gorgeous covers for the win. But did I already mention I was going to talk about folklore again? Good, because I am. And the next book I have to recommend for teens is Live Like a Goddess, Life Lessons from Legends and Lore by Jean Mingus. Me. Am I going to recommend in this video every book I released in 2023? Yes. If that bothers you, I am sorry. You don't have to buy them, but I am very proud of them, and therefore I think they would make good gifts. So, you know, I'm trying to be proud and promote my work, and I do think this is a great gifting book. This book is part folklore, part advice. It's a collection of stories that are versions of goddesses' stories from mythology around the world that I have adapted from the original sources, as well as a little bit of background on each woman, and then how you can maybe live a little bit more like them, like a takeaway from that story, how you can learn from their story, how you can be more confident, how you can be braver, how you can be kinder, based on these timeless stories that we've been learning from for millennia. And there are, like I said, goddesses from around the world in this book. Some of the examples from the contents are make your own choices, like Rhiannon, carve your own path, like Artemis, share what you know, like Mama Okyo, persevere, like Isis, demand respect, like Oshun, and many, many more. It is also a very beautiful book, and I feel like I can say that without sounding vain because I didn't illustrate it. I love, love, love the accompanying illustrations in this book. The illustrations are by Taylor Dolan, and I'm so honoured to have had her illustrate this book, and I am just so proud of this book in general. It was a really wonderful writing experience, getting to like write a little bit more in terms of advice and more of the takeaways, and sort of reflect back on the things that I've learned throughout my life, and maybe how they can be useful to you. Like I said, it's aimed at teens, so it's for sort of like 12 and up in terms of the advice in this book, but I do think it can also apply to adults. Then we have a collection of fairy tales. So this is Enchanted Tales and Happily Ever Afters from Macmillan's Collectors Library. So you might remember Macmillan Collectors Library from earlier. They also publish books that look a little bit different from the ones I showed you, and this is one of their latest volumes, specifically bringing together some of the most popular fairy tales or most well-known fairy tales in one place. So if you would like to introduce somebody to fairy tales with their first fairy tale collection, or would like to get something beautiful to put on the shelf for a fairy tale fan, this is perfect, perfect, perfect. It includes stories like The Little Mermaid, The Snow Queen, Rapunzel, Cinderella, and many, many more, and it's this gorgeous cloth bound edition with gold foiling. And as I've already said, gold foiling improves every single book that it's ever been put on. So yeah, would definitely be a nice one to unwrap, perhaps on Christmas or another holiday. So yeah. Moving on now though to children's books, starting with the sort of 9 to 12-year-old category. I thought I'd mention two novels I thought would make fantastic gifts for anyone in that sort of age range, maybe like 8 to 13. I always feel like age ranges are a bit prescriptive, and kids are very different in terms of what they'll read, and so are adults. So you know who you're buying for best, pick what you think is best for them, but if you're looking for a little bit of guidance and have a 8 to 12-year-old or 8 to 13-year-old in your life that you'd like to get a book for, then these would be fantastic. The first one is Koku and Kambe and the Heart of Midnight by Maria Motonreo Adebisi. And this is perfect, let me say, for fans of Percy Jackson. Now I do kind of hate saying things like that because I don't want it to come across as if I am like narrowing a book's focus and like making it sound derivative, but I also appreciate that if you're buying a book for a younger reader and you've not read the same books as them, but you know what kind of books they like, it can be really helpful. And obviously Percy Jackson is a very popular series. So if you know someone who enjoys Marvel comic books, Percy Jackson, these kind of stories, then they will love this. So this book is about Koku, a seemingly ordinary boy who goes on a school trip to a museum and ends up unleashing a demon. So he thinks, this can't go well, punishment time, but instead he ends up part of a quest to basically save the world from this demon. I mean, what more can you want? You have a fantastic band of characters, Coco and his two friends, and I just know that tons and tons of kids are going to love this book. Then for a similar age range in terms of novels, we have Impossible Creatures by Catherine Rundell. Now this is a fantasy novel set in a more fantastical world rather than being set in our own world, and follows Christopher Forrester, whose story really begins the day he saves a baby griffin and ends up going on an adventure in this magical world, discovering more magical creatures as well as friends and secrets about this world. And if you know somebody, if you know a child or even a teen or an adult who enjoys fantasy worlds and getting to learn about new fantasy worlds, and this is a perfect pick. It's also, again, a really beautiful book with a map. I mean, we all know a map is a big plus when it comes to fantasy books. In fact, any books, but particularly fantasy books. Before I get into the children's non-fiction, I'll mention the next two fiction books I have, which are for slightly younger readers. So this one is, I don't know, probably best for your like 6 to 9-year-olds. So like just the little category before your 9 to 12-year-olds, if that makes sense. Now, I'm not a bookshop, and this is just entirely based on my own assumptions from reading them. But it is The Skull by John Classen, and you may have come across John Classen for younger readers in the past previously, as he has written a few picture books, including Where's My Hat? It's called something like that, and it's like the best picture book that's ever been written. His books are hilarious, and I don't just mean for children, I mean for adults too. His books are phenomenal, and this one's for slightly older readers. It has, you know, like bigger text, but still heavily illustrated, and it is a retelling of a classic folktale, but particularly creepy folktales. And we all know kids love dark stuff. Like, despite what some adults want to believe, kids love dark stuff as long as it is age appropriate. So I am sure there is a child in your life who would enjoy this creepy little story with, again, gorgeous illustrations and so much wit and humour. It's also one that I think would be really nice to read together, like adult and child would really enjoy reading this together because John Claston's books are so clever. But coming back to the sort of 7 to 12 age range, I would say, like covering that whole breadth, I do have some non-fiction recommendations, and the first of them is Goddesses and Heroines by Jean Mingus. I told you I was going to mention every book I brought out this year in this video. You shouldn't be surprised at this point. This is my latest children's book. It's the third children's book I have written for DK that has been illustrated by the incredible Katie Ponder, and this one is all about more than 80 legendary women from around the world. But this one is non-fiction, like I said. It is about mythological women from around the world, whether they be fairies, witches, goddesses, mermaids, ordinary women who appear in myth but are mortal. And it includes details about those women, some of the cultures, some of the kind of parallels between different folklores and mythologies, as well as including versions of a number of their stories. So if you've picked up my book Greek Myths or Egyptian Myths before, it's a very similar structure, but just focused more around the kind of subcategories of mythological women, whether they be, like I said, like mythical creatures or ordinary women or goddesses even. And I am so proud of this book. And I have to say, you know, Katie does the most stunning illustrations every time we work together, but I do feel like she's just outdone herself with this. Like, the amount of research she clearly poured into each image she depicted in this book is out of this world, and I can't stop staring at it, and it came out months ago, but I've not been able to stop staring at it because I love it so much. So yeah, if you know a younger reader that's into mythology and would like to learn a little bit more about different mythologies, then this, again, I think would make a great gift. If I do say so myself. If mortals are particularly your thing though, or what you're interested in gifting a book about, then might I also suggest Let's Fill This World with Kindness, True Tales of Goodwill in Action by Alexandra Stewart and Jake Alexander. So this is a book that compiles the stories of various different people from history, from our contemporary world, who have exercised incredible kindness in their lives that we can emulate in our own lives. And I say we because even though this is for children, we can all do with emulating a little bit of their kindness and learning a little bit from them. The book collects together these figures, like I said, as well as reflecting a little bit on some of the themes from their stories, how they can be implemented in our own lives, even if our experiences are very different from them, or the world that we live in is very different from them, and sets out some questions to ask ourselves or younger readers that are reading this book to sort of think about our actions and how we can express ourselves and how we can help others around us. And again, I think this is a really nice one both for younger readers, but that also would be nice to read with an adult and talk about with an adult and think through with an adult. So that is something worth bearing in mind, and it's also really beautiful with some gorgeous accompanying illustrations. But then we have some non-fiction on different topics, including How Our Solar System Began, The Planets, Their Moons and Beyond by Aina Bestard. Now this is actually part of a series, shall we say, by Thames and Hudson Children's, which are these beautifully illustrated books in this format, and there's another one all about fossils, which I also have and can't stop looking at. Like, these are for children, but I genuinely think they're so interesting and so educational and so beautiful that all ages can enjoy them. Like, this would work as a coffee table book as much as it would work for a children's library, or a child's library, should I say. But I love the fossil books, so of course I wanted to pick up and share with you the solar system book when it came out this year. If you know a kid that's interested in space, in the stars, in the planets, in the natural world really, or science in general, this book is perfect for them. It will help them visualize the universe, it will help them learn interesting information, and it will help them be much smarter than you you and make you feel really, really silly. So yeah, maybe pick it up for yourself while you're at it. Then lastly, for children's non-fiction, and actually for this video at all, we have Glow, The Wild Wonders of Bioluminescence by Jennifer N.R. Smith. Now, this is another one which looks at the natural world, but particularly bioluminescence. So we are looking at plants and animals and fungi, which basically glow in the dark, which is such a fun topic, and it definitely makes for some beautiful, beautiful images, beautiful, beautiful illustrations. Really lends itself to this kind of book, which is another reason I do love children's non-fiction for adults, because sometimes adult non-fiction can skimp out on the pictures. And sometimes pictures are a really helpful way to learn about things. So I love this book. It is so stunning, and I know a lot of kids love learning about the natural world and the animal kingdom. I did in particular. Like, even though I'm a history buff as an adult, I loved my animal books as a kid, and I think that's true of a lot of children. So this is a really niche, interesting one on a topic they might not have a book about already, and they might not have learned about already, so it's worth checking out with gorgeous illustrations, as I said. But those are all the books I wanted to mention to you. No doubt tomorrow I'll think of a whole host of other books I would have liked to mention to you too, but you've got to cut it off somewhere, right? Goodness only knows how long this video is already. I do hope though that something in here appealed to you in terms of your gift giving, or just in terms of your own bookshelves. Hopefully you got some suggestions that will be helpful. And if you are still in search of a book for somebody in your life, then feel free to ask me about it in the comments. If you're looking for something specific for a child or an adult who's into something very specific, who likes specific genres, who likes specific authors, then let me know and I'll try and give you a suggestion, because I may very well have one. And I do have a ton of previous gift guides from previous years which focus in on books that came out those years, so they will also be linked down below if you'd like more suggestions. If there's anything you've picked up to gift or are planning to pick up to gift, I'd love to hear about it. I love hearing about the bookish gifts that people buy everybody, and I just hope you enjoyed this video. My next one will very likely be a massive life update catch up, because we're well overdue for that. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all again in the next one. Bye everybody.